So here we are again, back by unpopular demand and continuing to store up our treasures, as it were. Um, this is the second song I'm recording tonight, having just taken a look at Hamilton, Wait for It, on the day that my Uncle John died. Weirdly, and again, I suspect this is what music does. Um, as I was driving back to the motorway last night after visiting John and his family, um, a piece of music literally in my CD player at the time spoke to me. This piece of music spoke to me, and it spoke to me of that moment that I was in, where I was driving away from a man who was coming to the end of his life and a family that were going through the trauma of that experience. And I thought to myself, well, this has spoken to me now. I should speak about it because it resonates. And that's what this channel is about. It's about resonation. It's about trying to unpack what music does and what it says and why it says it. Now, as much as the very simple lyric of this song spoke to me, the reason this song was written and the circumstances in which this song was written were probably as important as the lyric. And I don't want to make a total hash of them. I don't pretend to be a documentarian. I don't pretend to be the kind of fan that has at his fingertips all of the stats and the facts and the figures. But if you don't know the Rush story, the basic is this. Neil Peart, the professor, the drummer and lyricist, his common law wife and himself had a young daughter who was killed in a single car accident, I think on the way to university in Canada. It might have been on the way back, but she was driving alone and she had a car accident and she died very tragically, understanding that this would be at some time in her late teens, I suppose. And a little over a year later, or around about a year later, Neil's common law wife died of cancer. And the suggestion in the telling of the story is that to a great extent, the grief of the loss of their daughter caused his wife to, if nothing else, not last as long as she might have, let's say. And so this man went from being me, a family man with a wife and children and an entirely sort of packaged life and a knowable life, to being on his own and having lost everything in his life that mattered. And it nearly broke him, obviously. You would imagine that it would. And he got on his motorbike and he did something in the order of 55,000 miles on his motorbike around Canada and North America and down into Mexico. There's a song he wrote about it called Ghost Rider, where he describes feeling like that ghost rider as he just sort of rode away from his life. Somewhere in that process, an old friend, a photographer, I think it was Andrew McNaughton, introduced him to a woman in California, a photographer, and Neil found love with this woman and ended up marrying her and having a young child. And that helped to redeem him, to bring him back from this very dark place of this loss. And ultimately, I believe she might have said at some point, how could you be, everybody tells me you're one of the best rock drummers in the world. How can you not be doing that? And for whatever reason, he got that push and he returned to the band about 5 years later. Rush had ceased to exist in all of our minds, other than as a sort of hope, as a remote possibility. And the band returned and they made Vapor Trails, and from Vapor Trails they made a number of albums, and in a lot of ways probably had their most successful period in terms of being on the mainstream radar They got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They played bigger concerts. They probably made a big chunk of the kind of money that they always should have made. They had a very successful late career resurgence. They stuck around long enough. But in this first album, Vapor Trails, Neil, very much as the lyricist, was writing, as he had anyway for a large chunk of the time, was writing about his experience of the world. Certainly he was writing like that from about 1979, I would say, with the Permanent Records album, a Permanent Waves album. So he wrote these songs that were all filled with the emotions of this thing that he'd been through. And he wrote this song, Sweet Miracle. And this is a very long intro, which I'm not supposed to do, and I've probably lost lots of people, and I belatedly say goodbye to them and the Nightwish fans who, sorry, it's not Nightwish, on sub, as you will. The intro is important because the intro is the song. The context for this song is the song. This is a song written by a man who had been through, objectively, an absolutely awful time, a tragic time where he had lost what felt like everything. And last night, driving home from a house that was waiting for death, the death of a beloved, I kind of found myself relating to this idea of how do we as people persevere? How do we keep going? How do we stand up and shoulder the load and put another step in front of us? And I think Neil captured that journey in this very, very simple and very poetic lyric. So let's take a look at remembering to click on there. Sweet Miracle. So there you go. In metaphor, Neil captures it completely. When the tide came in, he wasn't lifted by it. He didn't walk on the water. He was standing on the reef, the thing that sinks ships. He was standing on that thing when the tide swept in and pulled him completely beneath the surface, and he felt lost without a trace, with no hope at all. That's familiar, right? How many of us have felt that? No hope at all. How many of us have felt that at various times? But it ain't the end. When the tide came in, swept beneath the surface, lost without a trace, no hope at all, no hope at all. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle of life. I wasn't walking with angels. I was talking to myself, rising up to the surface, raging against the night, starless night. So, I didn't stop it because I knew we were going to get there. Oh, sweet miracle of life, he sings, after talking about being swept beneath the surface with no hope at all, the chorus already offers us what is going to be the answer, the sweet miracle of life, the idea that ultimately life is the miracle. Now, I love this lyric. I wasn't walking with angels, I was talking to myself. Neil, I don't know what I can't speak to Neil's belief system, but I know that there have been various lyrics that have talked about, have positioned him as a man that there was a pragmatist and a humanist, let's say. So he doesn't sort of attribute his redemption to some higher power, to some intervention. He attributes it to talking to himself, to pulling himself out of that dark place, rising up to the surface, raging against the night and the starless night. Now, Neil always did this, rage against the dying of the light. Was that Lear? I think that was Lear. Rage against the dying of the light. This man, pulled to a place of no hope, talked to himself, and raged against the night. And that is the miracle of life. We should never discredit the ability of Geddy to put into emotion another man's words. When he sings, "Oh, salvation," I mean, it reeks of that sense of salvation. It's a beautiful performance, especially when you know that he's singing it about someone else's salvation. A man who he loves deeply, but it wasn't him. It wasn't Geddy that was roiling beneath the surface. There's also the interesting fact, I don't know, there's probably, towards the latter years, it was mentioned a few times, but Rush is not a band that wrote, Neil Peart is not a man that wrote casually the word love. He didn't treat it casually. He didn't treat it like some piece of pap poetry. Neil Peart's approach to life was not that soft and soggy, but it's no mistake, it's no coincidence that this is one of those places that he addresses the redemptive quality of love. And if there's one common theme in this channel, it's the redemptive quality of love, the salvation offered by love. Man, I swear I want to say amen, right? I wasn't praying for magic. I mean, hiding in plain sight is very much what Neil spent a large chunk of his professional career doing. He didn't like the limelight. He hid in plain sight, but he rose up, and he didn't just rise up to the surface. He didn't rise up to the reef from which he was washed. He flew into the light. He flew into the light. I mean, can I get an amen? This is such a beautiful, simple lyric. I was swept from the reef. I had no hope. I was in the darkness of the deepest, darkest water on a starless night. But I rose to the surface and I flew into the light. That's hopeful. On a day when we lost a good man, that's hope. It's redemption. It's the redemption of love. It's the sweet miracle of life. And do not doubt the human engine that is love and life. Never doubt it. From the surface to fly into the light, into the light. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle. Oh, sweet miracle of life. So there it is. It's probably not a classic Rush song. It's not one of the greats. It's not one of the songs you'll see listened to by reactors. It's a simple song without a guitar solo, without anything particularly flashy, but it's an expression of one man's joy at redemption and one man's sharing with us the idea that at the darkest time we rise. At the darkest time we rise, and we don't even have to be limited by the surface. We can fly into the light, and I think that's beautiful. And it spoke to me on a dark drive home from a sad place. Thanks for sharing this with me. I'll see you again. Until I do, keep the faith.